It made me question my own assumptions I made about us as learners. It made me question and really examine what we were offering students, particularly Brown and Black students in public education. And it made me question the all around belief that is held about Brown and Black students, starting with myself.
Amidst all of the conversation about recruiting Black educators, where are the discussions about retention? The Exit Interview podcast was created to elevate the stories of Black teachers, professors, counselors, social workers, and administrators who have been pushed out of the traditional education space. My co-host, Kevin Adams, and me, Dr. Asia Lyons, are on a mission with our guests to inform school districts, teachers unions, families, students, educators, and others interested in understanding the challenges of retaining Black people in education. Welcome to The Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. And welcome back, everybody. It's going to be a fire episode, Kevin. What do you think?
Always.
Welcome back for a fire episode of the Exit Interview podcast for Black educators. It's me, Dr. Asia, and Kevin.
Sorry. I had something weird going on, trying to figure that out. It's had a lot of technology issues so far.
Yeah. Listen, the technology is real. We've accepted it. We might have dogs barking. We might have birds chirping because my bird is somewhere around, and that's just a part of it. But we're excited, and we're here with Lacey Robinson. Thank you for coming on our show.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. And I'm going to start by reading your incredible bio, just so that our audience knows who you are. I was talking to one of my good friends, RVN, about you. She's like, oh my God, I know who that is. So she was super excited. So she'll be, I'm sure, the first listener on this episode. Lacey Robinson is the president and CEO of UnboundEd. I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yes.
And the chair of the board of Core Learning. As CEO, Robinson sets the organization's vision for transforming instruction for students at the margins. She is a former teacher, principal, and professional development specialist who has focused on literacy, equity, and school leadership for more than 25 years. Her life's work aims to enable educators to disrupt systemic inequities in their school districts and classrooms. As CEO of UnboundEd, Robinson is responsible for overseeing UnboundEd's health, sustainability, and vision for engaging, affirming, and meaningful grade-level teaching can transform teachers' experiences and students' learning. In 2022, she also led the merger of UnboundEd, Pivot Learning, and Core Learning under the UnboundEd banner, creating the nation's largest K-12 educator development organization focused on improving teaching and learning for underserved students. Robinson is a leading national voice on disrupting the predictability of students' educational outcomes and was named 2023's Forbes 50 over 50 list. In recognition of her innovative leadership, her new book, Justice Seekers, Pursuing Equity in the Details of Teaching and Learning, was released in July 2023. It is a love letter to teachers, inspiring us all to recognize that justice is found in the details of teaching and learning. She frequently serves as a keynote speaker and is featured on Emily Hanford's 2022 Soul the Story podcast. She is a proud graduate of Florida A&M University and Teachers College, Columbia University. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Boy, you want to feel old. Have somebody read your bio.
Listen, I'm getting there now. It's getting longer and longer. Yeah. I read it. I was reading it earlier and I was thinking 50 over 50. I can get there. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is not what people think it is. 50 over 50, but I'm always forever like 25, 30 in my head, I guess. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah. So same, 100% same. I was sitting at my daughter's softball game yesterday and I was thinking, I know how old I am and I also know how old I feel and I can see. Yeah. That's just.
Yeah. And I think I know this to be true. 50 is the mountaintop. You know, when you're a first year teacher or you're like just starting your profession or even just embarking on life on your own, right? And you think 50 is so far away, and
Yes.
every year you're climbing, you're trying to reach that mountaintop, right? What people don't tell you is that you actually don't get close to the mountaintop till you're around 50. And
Mm-mm.
like some people get there earlier, but trust me, even when they get there earlier, they're forging a new trail to go up to it. And so
Yeah.
anyway, I know that's not what the podcast is about, but a lot of people didn't reach their greatness until they were 50.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. That's true.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. My mom used to say all the time, you know, you can go ahead and marry a man when you turn 52. That's about the age. And I'm like,
I love it.
what?
That's it. That's good
Yeah. Yeah, it is good. Kevin's let us know. He's like, that makes sense.
advice.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're here, the exit interview. Obviously, we're going to talk about your book, Justice Seekers, Pursuing Equity in the Details of Teaching and Learning,
Yes.
that you've written and published. And as a side note, before we get into this, like a little story, I remember I follow you on LinkedIn, and I remember just seeing you go to the warehouse and open the box.
Yeah.
And I was like that. And I'm liking it. Like, that's so awesome. This is before I was, before your people asked, like, can she come on the podcast? So I'm like, good for her. That's so great. And then I fast forward and I'm like, oh my God, we're going to talk about the book on the podcast. So the small world, because I just think, imagine how that felt.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we'll talk about that as we get into the questions of like, what are you doing now?
Yeah.
I can only imagine that it's a huge stack of boxes full of books and that feeling, right? To see it.
Yeah. No, it was a moment. A reason why I'm looking down is because I'm pulling out. I'm going to show you the next moment I had just 2 days ago with my mother. We could talk about that later, but it was a moment, especially as a avid reader, a lover of words, a struggling reader who then became a strengthened reader. Like, it's something to see your name on the title of a book, and more importantly, for people to hear your thoughts that have been in your head.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, let's get into it. First question we always ask folks is, tell us about your education journey. How did you end up becoming an educator?
You know what I tell people? It was a lot of God, grace, happenstances, how I became an educator, because, let me tell it, when I was probably in my secondary track, I either wanted to be a weather woman, I wanted to be a newscaster or a journalist, really a newscaster. I wanted to be like a weather woman, then move up to a newscaster. And then I was like, well, if I can't do that, I think I want to be an actress. Now, this is hilarious because I never participated in drama or anything in high school. I played an instrument. I was a band geek, but I knew that I wanted storytelling to be a part of my track. And I knew I was going to write books, right? Like, I felt that in my bones. And my mother in high school, I was thinking about this the other day. In high school, I lived a dual life. Like, I was in AP and honors, ELA and humanities and world history and anything that had to do with the language arts, I soared in. But honey, math, I could not. I spent my entire secondary career in Algebra 1 and didn't find out why until I got to college. And so when I graduated from high school, I had a 1.79 GPA and got into Florida A&M, thank God, by the grace of God, and found out I had actually dyscalculia, had teachers nurture me. And my mother kept saying, I think you should be an educator. Like, that is your thing. I watched what you've done as a child. And so I chose the track. One, because my mother was like, you're not about to be an actress. Like, you're not.
Listen.
She's like, I want you to have a 401k. I want you
to God bless moms out there, right?
That's right.
It's not for everybody.
Right.
It's not for everybody. And it was a bunch of happenstances, how I ended up at Marva Collins, how I fell in love with teaching. And so one of the things I tell a lot of young educators is trust your instincts and lean into where people may be pushing you, because they may see something in you that you don't see in yourself.
Yeah.
So that's, Florida A&M, then Marva Collins, then Teachers College, because I was following my best friends to New York City. And I needed an excuse of like why I was moving to New York. And my best friend was like, you should apply to Columbia. And I was like, Columbia? She was like, Teachers College. I had never even known there were teacher colleges.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's just wasn't part of our conversation in the teacher lounge. You know what I mean? And started working for Lucy Calkins. Honestly, she offered me a job. And when I found out it paid your tuition, I was like, well, honey, you would have asked me to mop the floors. I would have mopped the floors if you paid for my tuition at Columbia. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of happenstances, a lot of God-driven happenstances. That's how I became an educator.
Okay, awesome.
We love that.
Yeah, we do.
Like, I think that's common. What we've heard is that people, Black educators, there's some sort of like calling, or somehow it's not like the traditional path of like, I was going to do this. It's a lot of like, somehow someone got me into it. And I love that advice for young educators to trust in those people that are pushing you places,
Yes.
because I think that is something important for educators to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I say being a teacher, honestly, being an educator, I've thought a lot about this recently. I feel like it's in our DNA as Black educators. I mean, when you think about the type of community that we hail from, that our DNA is from the African diaspora, teaching is a part of the culture, right?
Yep.
It's a part of our culture. You have teachers in your lives that weren't certified educators, that didn't work in schoolhouses, and yet you were taught along the way. And I literally mean like showing you, guiding you, using story, using trial and error. And I just think it's a part of our DNA. And I think that there needs to be not just the adaptive pushing, but there has to be technical tactics out now to draw us into this profession. And we could talk about that much later, but that's one of the first things I also try to let a lot of people know is that it's in our roots to be educators. And you just have to tap into it. You have to tap into it.
Yeah, I love that. You talk about Marva Collins in the book. So can you talk to us and our audience about that experience working at that school?
Yeah, I mean, it was happenstance. First of all, before I got to Florida A&M, my aunt had gone to hear Marva Collins speak at a business association meeting. And so I remember the movie as a kid, like sitting, I think it was like an ABC family night movie, and like watching, the whole story, just fruition on the television about her and her kids and what she did. And then years later, my aunt getting a book signed by her and bringing it to me, probably like around my senior year of high school. And so again, I say that it was like planted in my path that I would happen upon her while I was at Florida A&M. My best friend had actually gone to do her internship at the Marva Collins Preparatory School in Cabrini Green, which is no longer in existence anymore, in Chicago. And so when she went to do it, I just thought that was like the most awe-inspiring thing, and she came back and she talked about how liberating it was, but the amount of work, like how hard it was. I then, when it came time for me to do my internship, Florida A&M, HBCU, they push you to jump higher, to explore more. And part of their residency program, they didn't want you just to do your residency in Florida. They wanted you to seek residencies in different communities, in different regions. I have friends that went to Germany to do their residency. So like applying to the Marva Collins Preparatory School in Ohio brought me back to my roots. I got an opportunity to live with my sister again because she was in Cincinnati. And it gave me the opportunity to be in an environment where honestly, it was the first time in my life that I had seen Black joy as the center of learning, that I had seen the level of expectation that I had only felt first by my family and very few and far in between before I got to FAMU in my K-12 educational track. I had never seen it concentrated like that. I talk about this in Justice Seekers, but like walking into my first day of residency into a second, third grade combined classroom where the students were reading Animal Farm. Like, I stepped out in the hallway and busted out in tears because I had never seen that level of learning and expectations and just excitement and joy and hard work all world rolled up into one in a school day. And so I spent my residency there and it kicked my butt.
Yeah, that's so awesome.
Yeah, it didn't just kick my butt as an educator, but it kicked my butt as a young Black woman who had not been in that kind of environment. It made me question my own assumptions I made about us as learners. It made me question and really examine what we were offering students, particularly Brown and Black students in public education. And it made me question the all around belief that is held about Brown and Black students, starting with myself and then the system.
Yeah,
That's powerful. That's powerful.
it is.
And to be able to experience an environment like that, to see what is possible early on in your career and practice is profound and has a profound impact. So, Lacey, it sounds like you were having a wonderful experience, like in your residency. Tell us more about your teaching career, your time in the classroom, and subsequently, what caused you to move on from the classroom?
Well, again, by the time I graduated from Florida A&M, the teaching bug had been lit in me. It was my passion. It was my purpose. I found a lot of joy in it. I really loved early childhood education, probably because deep down inside, I had wanted to become a pediatrician. But I was told in high school that there was no way I would ever be able to become a doctor because my math wasn't on par, which is totally not true, but that's a whole nother subject. I started my career in Marietta, Georgia at a predominantly Brown and Black school. We call these schools urban schools, but the truth is it sat in a suburban area. And most suburban areas have low income, middle income, high income sections. My students hailed from, I would say, the low to middle income. But if they were Brown and Black, I kid about this, but it's the honest to God truth. If they were Brown and Black, and if they had some sort of implication, they were at my elementary school. I didn't find this out until many years later, how at that time the district was divided up. And so I launched my career there teaching first grade. I still remember my first group of kids. And I did things that came natural to me. If a first grade girl walked into my classroom and her hair, was all over her head, honey, I went to my desk. I had a brush. I pulled the brush out. I combed her hair. I put barrettes in it. I made sure that my kids felt and looked their best. I made sure that everything I learned at Marva Collins, from using my own cultural inferencing to using their cultural inferencing to having high expectations, everything I learned about those essential components that are named in the science of reading that is essential for a reader, for someone to gain in order to grow in their literacy, I pushed that even without the proper material.
Yeah.
And so that first year, it whipped me into shape. And I will tell you, while I got joy on the inside of the classroom, I was met with a lot of strife, a lot of disciplinary action in terms of I wasn't following along with the program. A lot of, would you just fall in line and go along with the rest of the teachers in your group? And I just so happened at that time, again, call it a God stance. She's now my best friend. I just so happened to be hired on the same team as a friend of mine who went to Florida A&M.
Oh, wow.
She was a Black teacher, and we were the only two Black teachers on that first grade team. It was about 6 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And so that launched me. I went on to, as I said, move to New York. I became a professional developer. I had never even known of the professional development world until I started teaching in New York, and quickly realized that I not only loved teaching children, but I actually loved teaching adults in the education profession because it made me study my pedagogy. So I've been a first grade, second grade, kindergarten, pre-K, fifth grade teacher. I've been a professional developer in a school system. I've been a turnaround principal for middle school, and now I'm a CEO and president of UnboundEd and Core. So it's
I
been a
love
long
that.
track.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about like having your friend be in that same space with you and kind of met with this pushback of why can't you be like everyone else? And it's interesting them saying that. I'm thinking about you got to be in a space in your internship time where this excellence, you had a foundation. And so trying to push and beat that after you left and constantly I'm assuming, constantly seeking that and pushing that with people, teachers, other teachers, principals, whoever, who've not seen that experience and have no idea what it's like to teach in the ways that you saw at Marva Collins and the way that you taught there. And so I can only imagine the type of pushback and resistance that you experienced trying to do what, like you said, came natural, but also what you saw when you were being prepared to teach, which is what you're supposed to be doing, right?
Yes. You know what? Honestly, as you say that, that's part of what's built into the fabric of UnboundEd and Core. That is why we talk about wanting to sit shoulder to shoulder with educators, why we want to build the coalition of the willing in our education space, because I now know that those educators, those teachers, those leaders that were pushing back, that wanted me to fall in line, it wasn't because they woke up every morning and said, how can I do more harm to these brown and black kids? It was because they were ill prepared as leaders and teachers and teacher assistants. It's because the system in itself doesn't allow it to feed its professions their ongoing learning, which is essential for not only your career trajectory, but for our students' educational career. And so it was just a part of, honestly, the fallout of the system, why they just wanted me to follow along, why they just wanted me to go with the new program, that was being pushed down from the district. And so, honestly, that is a part of our work to spread the news about the research developed and evaluated pedagogy, content knowledge, and the level, we say equity, because equity gives it a label, but it's really the level of belief and understanding that it takes in order to dismantle the systemic racist and biased policies, practices, and procedures that all of us fall under in our school system. Is it getting better? Yes, slightly. Does it have a way to go? Absolutely. So I don't fault them now. I'm not angry. I don't talk about it because I'm bitter. I talk about it to expose it, to name it.
Yeah. That's a big piece of the work that we do here on the podcast is like that, the naming it, right? People need to have a name for what they're experiencing. They need to know what's going on. And some people are angry, right? Some people are bitter.
And rightfully so.
And rightfully so, right? Rightfully so. And some people are saying like, you know what? Made peace with it, or I understand it in a bigger sense. And so now I've chose to go in this route of doing this thing to help to solve the problem, right?
Yep. But can we name the other side of it too? Some people, let's be real, as people of color in this country, there is trauma. We all have been exposed to the trauma. So have our white counterparts. People choose to ignore the trauma. So as much as we have people that are angry, that are witnessing and testifying on it, they want to do something, we also have a lot of people that are choosing to ignore it because they haven't either been taught that you can move through that trauma. You don't have to sit in that trauma. They've been taught to ignore it and just to keep on keeping on, and those folks are the folks that I'm also trying to encourage because by ignoring it, you're allowing it to fester.
Yeah. So you talked about all these positions in your teaching and being an educator, but there was a place where you left a traditional teaching institution. Yeah. What was that decision like? What made you decide it's time to think about broadening and doing more for Black and brown youth besides, or BIPOC youth besides being in a traditional institution?
I will tell you, it's the few years I spent as a turnaround principal. And I'm telling you, that was a life reckoning for me. I mean, I was shook to my core. I was in a predominantly brown and Black school system, a school system that sat in a suburban/urban area. I mean, it had every corner of that county holds some of the most high socioeconomic status and low socioeconomic status. However, coming from New York City, it was a different kind of low socioeconomic status that I was exposed to in New York City. And so, being a turnaround principal at that time, I assumed being in a predominantly educator of color system that we would have that same sort of resistance, that high expectation, that same sort of wanting to really work together collectively to push our students. And what I found was that the smog was deep and long and far and wide. What I found was it's just as important for people of color to examine their own internal racist bias and not just social economic bias that we have internally because it manifests. I also recognize that we haven't been professionally developed. And so for me, I will tell you, I had to call my own self out. I entered into that schoolhouse assuming that I was going to teach those brown and black middle schoolers the assimilationist lens that I held, that I was going to teach them the assimilation tactics, that if they would just follow along, fall in line, wear the uniform, if I could just change the environment so that it was an educational environment, that we could move them into a space where they became proficient readers and writers and mathematical thinkers. And in some cases, changing the environment did work. In some cases, the money that we got for being a turnaround school helped. But in many cases, it was the mindset and beliefs that were the barriers to what those students could do. Now, I'm not saying my students didn't enter into the schoolhouse with their own traumatic background, with their own aspects of where they were coming from in their environment and how to survive in that environment. I'm not saying that the parents and the community members and the educators, that we didn't enter into that schoolhouse angry, right? Sometimes I felt like we were angry. We didn't know what we were angry about. And I held that anger. And what I learned in that moment was when I got the kids to walk down the hallway quiet, when I got them to get in their classroom before the bell, when I say I meant we, when we offered them courses that were rigorous or we tried to expand, their experiences, that at the end of the day, the belief that I held about my students, about my parents, about the teachers was building my own prison. And subsequently, I was enacting what I now know to be, honestly, incarceration tactics. Now, some people would say, Lace, you made it safe. Yeah, we made it safe. We did. But sometimes I question safe for who? And can I say this as well? It wasn't just incumbent upon the school and the educators. It was what was happening in the community. It was what was happening with our local police. It was what was happening with the social economic status and how we were dealing with that in the community. It was a full 360. And I was just one little cog in the wheel. And so I had to have a strong, I call it my coming to Jesus moment with myself. And I knew that I was going to continue to do harm to myself and to the students. And so another set of circumstances happened. And when those circumstances happened, I had to stop and say to myself, there's got to be a better answer. And so I started seeking those answers outside of the schoolhouse.
I think that's, Asia, I think that's a first, where we had a Black educator who reflected on their own practice, right? And the harm that we can cause, and we know we can, and I appreciate your story, Lacey, particularly because I've just become an assistant principal this year, and we have some challenging students, and a lot of educators have been patient and really worked hard to kind of support these students. But there is at this point in October, there's this question of educators are like, well, what are we doing? What is the thing that we're doing?
Yep.
Right. And people are like, there's no consequences for these kids. And we're like, well, we're trying to be restorative in our practices. But it does push you into a point where you're like, well, then we'll just be punitive. Right. And we will just punish these students. And a lot of times there's bigger, like you said, I appreciate that idea. of just being one of the cogs in that big wheel going around, because I think that's what we get caught up in. And the easiest thing to do is to fall back on, those oppressive practices.
Oh, yeah. Listen, it's important as a school leader for you to first set a safe environment, right? So I get that. And the world that we live in now, coming out of COVID, I say it's been the collision, honey, of the traumas. Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
You look at about the economic inequities, the strife that happens along with that, where we are now in this country in terms of how we treat our neighbors, it's all of that. And the students are coming in with all of that in their proverbial knapsacks, as well as your educator, right? We're all swimming in it. And so you want to make the environment safe. You also want to make the environment restorative. I know one of the first things we did was we took out of school suspension. We did in school suspension. We only held expulsion for those extreme, because we had extreme cases, and we were able to drive down our disciplinary actions, but it took a lot of work. It took a shifting of the mindset, though. And that to me is the hardest part in all of this, is to shift the mindset of yourself and your fellow educators, because moment to moment in the classroom, you are trying to sustain that environment so that learning, growing, feeling safe, joy, attention, all of those things are being balanced out. And at any given moment, one member of that community can cause the imbalance.
That's right.
And I don't just mean the student. It can also be the teacher.
Of course. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
I've
For
seen
sure.
that happen. Seen that happen. I've caused that to happen.
I've caused it to happen too.
Yeah. Same.
Let's be real. I mean, I just think your story is really important, I think. And I'm really glad that it's getting out there. This is a question that Asia already has an answer to in her perspective. I think we always have to ask it. From your perspective, I think you've spoken on some of the pieces already, but what would you like educators, administrators, unions, the system to know if they want to retain Black educators?
Well, it goes back to what I just said. I think that if you want, first of all, it's your belief about what it means to be an educator. Let's start with that. If you are a leader, if you are a district leader, if you are a union leader, a union member, what do you believe about the educational profession? Do you believe that it is a knowledge mining career? Do you believe that educators should enter into this and into their career with a pathway? Do you believe that educators need a constant priming of their knowledge, skills, contact with coaching and with feedback that is meant to help them identify the areas that they have improved, the areas that they would like to improve, and the gaps that they may have that they may need support in? Okay. Do you believe that educators deserve to work all day, plan all weekend, and be able to go home to their family and respective lives without having to get second and third jobs? Do you believe that educators need the support in financial literacy to not only help them understand how their career trajectory could ultimately support their home life, their family life, their own life trajectory, but could combat the financial insecurity that has plagued their very communities? If you want people of color to come, let's just start with that, to come into this career, let's consider the financial insecurity that has been pervasive in our brown and Black communities and ask ourselves as a field, what could I do to support that? Is it possible for me to be able to have educators come in and offer financial literacy courses for free? Is it possible for me to come in and to say to educators that, because listen, the retirement and the kind of systems that we used to have are not here today. But we all know if you go on Instagram right now, you can throw a rock and find all of these financial literacy gurus that could show you how to make your money make money while you working during the day. So let's start from there. Let's start with that. Then let's start with prior to Brown versus Board of Education, we had a Brown and Black educational cohort. We had Brown and Black educators that, quite frankly, when you look at the history of education in the United States before Brown versus Board of Education, white educators were going to those schools to learn the pedagogy and content knowledge that was being pushed. So those students were coming out with a science, mathematical, critical thinking, literacy, being literate. They were coming out of those schoolhouses wanting to have career trajectories that would help them flourish in that, only to meet Jim Crow, only to meet those civil rights inequities. And so that teaching cohort got fizzled out with Brown versus Board of Education, and the tactics that were put out there to be counterintuitive to what that technical fix was in terms of desegregating schools. So you got to look at the historical context and ask yourself, what are the residual effects of that are occurring in our very systems today? And what can we do to thwart those? Have we gone to our local community colleges? Have we gone to our HBCUs that are close by? Have we gone to our local schools and middle schools and started talking to students about what it means to be an educator? Have we set up systems in our system to support all of our new educators, particularly our educators of color, that gives them an affinity opportunity to talk about how they're bringing their whole selves to the school while having to then increase their pedagogical content knowledge at the same time? There are fixes to this. I know there are fixes in it because I've watched other professions do it. So, yeah, honey, I have a whole plan of how we can.
It sounds like it.
Our work at UnboundEd and Core is around that. When you come to our institutes, when you participate in our summits, you will see a cohort that models what our educational systems should look like. We have purposely primed the pump so that educators of color, along with their white colleagues, sit shoulder to shoulder with us in this work. We do that to hold ourselves as an example for the system.
I love that.
So I do believe there is a way to thwart that. And then last but not least, we did a national marketing campaign, which is something that I'm starting to work on. You know how we have marketing campaigns to go into STEM? We have marketing campaigns to go into the military. We need a national marketing campaign so that people understand that this profession is powerful.
Yeah.
It is invigorating, and it holds a career trajectory that can allow you to explore all of your gifts and talents.
I love that. And it is super dope. And I'm thinking about knowing that you facilitate, well, you don't present at conferences, you build conferences.
I do both.
Right?
I do both.
And so you're seeing these teachers across the country, you're looking at the sea of faces. Do you notice an increase or decrease of Black teachers when you're looking out amongst folks, especially now as specifically because you just said you were here in Denver, are you seeing the number of Black people increase who are in education here in this area?
So I will tell you this, overwhelmingly, the educational cohort of teachers that we have and leaders is still predominantly white. It's still predominantly white women. That is part of the educational trope that was developed around what a teacher looks like, sounds like.
Yep.
Now, what I do notice is that there are far more educators of color that are more vocal about bringing their cultural, historical, local, linguistic context into the schoolhouses. There are far more educators that are pursuing career tracks that can build their pedagogical content knowledge, build their historical context so that they come back to the school system overly prepared, right? There are way more educators of color that are moving into leadership positions. But has that number grown? No, because we've watched the teaching cohort in itself begin to shrink. And that's not just because of COVID. That's not just because of what our current pressures in our society are putting on our educators. That has been happening for decades.
Yeah.
And so I think that there is far more work to bring in Black educators. There's far more work to bring in educators of color. But I also see springs of hope.
Yes. No, I mean, you talk about it. Talk about it.
Yeah, we do. On my LinkedIn 2 weeks ago, I just put out a poll, like, how many Black educators do you think work in the state of Colorado? And I, gave folks options. And most people thought the answer was between 500 to 700. And actually, the Colorado Department of Education said at the end of 2022, we had 888 Black teachers working in Colorado out of how many thousands. So I had to ask that question because you've been in spaces here where that's what you're looking at. It's like educators in space, and to like look out on the landscape, because we are seeing it's mostly white women in spaces. When I taught at CU Denver as a pre-service teachers, it became less and less diverse within the 3 years that I was teaching. Yeah, I just wanted to see if that was true, at the national landscape as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what we see, though, what you're naming is that there is actually, I believe, an interest around folks of color joining the educational cohort. I think that it gets thwarted by first the financial. I mean, you look across that financial landscape and you're like, okay, am I going to be able to pay my rent? Can I support my family? I think second comes this political thwarting that has happened, an educator in our educational field. We've been used as pawns. Listen, they sought out, honestly, to me, they looked across the landscape and said, now what community is not as organized that we can, let's put educators front and center. And honestly, it boggles my mind why nobody has stopped to say, like, hold on a second. You want to browbeat educators while simultaneously dressing your kids every morning and sending them to the schoolhouse. Like,
that's right.
There should be more cooperative, collaborative. And I'm not saying that what you're saying doesn't have valid pieces to it, or that you don't have a right to speak on behalf of your kids. But what I'm saying is that dividing us, being divisive, what actually do you think the outcome is? Well, some of them have an outcome in mind, but that's a whole nother podcast.
Yeah.
And so I think that the other thing I would tell you where hope springs is that look across now, we got organizations and communities that are rising up against it. We got organizations and communities that are saying, banning books. Are you out your mind? Do you see where we are in this 21st century? Banning books is the last thing that we need to do. And so that's the other where I talk about hope springs. There's more of an audacity that's happening, across our educator of color community. And I'm hoping that audacity helps light fire for folks to come and join us.
Yeah, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
We love that. That's the wave. So tell us more right now. You've told us a little bit, but just about UnboundEd.
Yes.
And your work there. Let's get into that.
Yes. Honestly, people think I'm tongue in cheek when I say this, but I call it the halls of justice. I have the privilege of working alongside phenomenal educators from UnboundEd to CORE. We are the largest K-12 professional development provider that has equity at the center of design for the instructional core. The instructional core is the lane that we choose to stay in. We truly believe that there is justice in the details of teaching and learning. And so our organization offers our edu community professional development across all spans. We have a national institute that now is happening 3 times a year. We're launching our first ever Leaders Institute in February in Anaheim, California, where we're calling all state, district, local, schoolhouse, informal and formal authority folks to come together in Anaheim. And let's sit at the table as leaders and examine our systems that are either constructing or deconstructing the possibility of what we call glean. Is it grade level, engaging, affirming, meaningful instruction that is happening in our schools? And so from the state, district, local school, we have leaders that have the power to move dollars, professional development days, personnel, materials that will align the system around grade level, engaging, affirming, meaningful instruction. And so we're calling all leaders to join us in February. And then after that, in June, we are back in Denver for our National Standards Institute. This is the standard of teaching with equity at the center of design. And then we will end our institute track in Washington, D.C. next summer. We have local summits. After our institutes ended, My folks stomped literally across the United States, from the East Coast to the West Coast to the Midwest and the North and to the South. And we held local 2.5 day summits in systems that just gives a quick snapshot of what happens in our now 4-day institute. We do Glean inventory walkthroughs. We try and customize as much as possible, where we go into different states and local school systems where we're able to do in-person professional development sessions. We have an ecosystem. So if you need asynchronous or synchronous development, you want to look at a vlog, you want to join an educational community that's learning about the science of reading, you can become a member of our UnboundEd ecosystem. And then we have our powerful for-profit core. Now, core to me is, I call it the engine in our locomotive, because core not only saturates educators in the science of reading, but they also do the work around the science of learning and mathematics. We have an online reading academy that is probably one of the second most taught online academy around the science of reading in the country. We're actually upgrading that now. There's a new version that's coming out next year. I can't talk about it yet, but it's going to be really powerful and something that the EduSphere has not seen.
Oh, nice.
And they do coaching and in-person professional development on the core side around supporting systems that have adopted an aligned curriculum in reading, language, arts, and mathematics. We're a full service suite, as my grandfather used to say, from the rooter to the tutor.
There we go.
Amen.
There we go.
That's fantastic. And so tell us about the book. We've been kind of hinting around, but tell us about the book, please.
Yes, this is Justice Seekers. And so Justice Seekers, Pursuing the Equity and the Details of Teaching and Learning, as you said earlier, is our love letter to educators. It tells a little bit about my background, first as a learner, the struggle that I had as a reader, and then the background in my pre-service at Marva Collins. It gives us a dip into the historical lens around our EduSphere and the educational tracks, particularly around teachers of color. It then also takes the reader into our framework. It talks a little bit about how we got to the justice in the details of teaching and learning, how we have equity at the center of design. And then it launches you into, well, what is Glean? What is the purpose of Glean? And then it gives you case studies where we've had actual educators go out and magnify Glean in their lesson. And so we hope that folks go out and listen. I've had high schoolers reach out to me who have now read the book and are using it for book studies in their high school classrooms. There are universities now that are using it in their pre-service, as well as schools that are having book clubs. We will have a book club launched in next year, so stay tuned for that. But that's Justice Seekers.
That's fantastic.
Awesome.
Well, we'll wrap up with my favorite question.
Okay.
And that is, what's bringing you joy these days?
Okay, so I'll answer that if you two will also answer it.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So what's bringing me joy? Well, there is a famous Christian singer that says, I will stand my ground until hope can be found. And I remind myself of that every single day. It's one of the reasons why I love the color yellow, because I feel like yellow, really magnifies and helps me remember that hope is always there. I'm going to tell you what brings me joy is my daily seeking of freedom. Toni Morrison and Nina Simone, to me, are two of my sheroes who spoke of and sang and wrote about what it means to be free. And what I'm learning now in my journey is that freedom as a Black woman, freedom as a Black educator is a daily pursuit. I am free in who I am. I am free in what I learn. I am free in the audacity that I carry with me everywhere I go. I am free in the spaces that didn't expect me to show up. I am free with the folks that look like me that don't realize that freedom is at their fingertips as well. And I am free with other folks that look like me that are pursuing freedom on a daily basis. And so going after freedom from the moment my toes hit the ground is what brings me joy every day.
We should have had her go last.
I know. That's what I was thinking, Asia. It's bringing me joy.
My cat. I'm like the bird of my.
Hey, that's fine. That's your joy.
That's
No. Yeah. I'm going to say something about what's bringing me joy. It is the liberation piece. So I left teaching in 2018. And I should say I was pushed out of teaching in 2018 and have found being an entrepreneur, working as a business owner, talking to people about their exit interview stories and being able to amplify the voices of Black educators who've left the field of teaching has really been bringing me joy. And just being able to kind of share that, like, hey, we believe you, put your story out there. That always brings me joy. And then, of course, I have to say, like, my family, right? Being able to hang out with my family, being able to see my daughter thrive. My daughter is twice exceptional. So she learns through dyslexia and she has an out of this world comprehension, right, level. And so I think about seeing her learn and grow. And we have her now in a school that she's thriving in. And we are so proud of that. So that's bringing me joy to see, like, she's loving school.
Yes.
And I'm so hopeful for her. I'm just so hopeful for her. And what's also bringing me joy is just, I don't know, I just get to meet dope people all the time. Like, I do, like, think about it. Kevin and I get to interview folks all the time. I get to be in space and community with folks all the time that are pushing and questioning and doing all the things and seeking. And that's just so awesome to me. That is like, even if we've never met, we're all in this together to figure some pieces out. That's what's been bringing me joy these days.
I love it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Kevin.
All right. Now I have to bring it all home. I can definitely agree with Asia, the family piece. I have a 10th and 11th grader right now, nearing the end of this first part of their educational journey. And they are both impressing me, and I see them thriving in school and having a joy for school. I see my daughter, who's the 11th grader, having this tendency that I'm like, you could be a dynamic educator. You know that. That could be something, she's a teacher assistant in one of our 8th grade classes where the kids can be a little challenging and they have a long-term sub. So they've been struggling to make the right choices. I have to tell her, remember, you're teacher assistant. Your job isn't to necessarily run the class. But, she still is like, no, but I'm still working.
Yeah.
Bringing me a lot of joy to talk to her about the kids that she's getting to do work and what she's trying to do to help motivate them. That's really special. I think right now I'm getting a lot of joy. My position as assistant principal, Lacey, is supporting our Indigenous and Native education at my school, our programming. And so this week was really great. Or last week, we had our first meeting of our family councils. We had a potluck and we're able to break bread and had people show up, and it felt really good. And then Monday, tomorrow, we are having our Indigenous Peoples Day celebration, which is like a conference, our second annual at our school. And so we're dropping all curriculum and we're learning about Indigenous perspectives on Columbus, Transform Columbus Day movement.
Yes.
Yeah.
The history of boarding schools. And our kids will also be learning about missing, murdered, and Indigenous women, right? So it's going to be a really special day. So a lot of joy there, pushing back. Like Asia said, joy from this conversation this morning, all the wisdom and the jewels you were dropping, Lacey, definitely gets me excited for the upcoming week. And I definitely have to mention joy from my band.
Yes.
The band.
Yes.
The band
Shout out to the band.
Freedom, the band is kind of like the dream.
Yes.
We've been playing a lot lately, so that's been good.
Good.
I mean, both of
Yay.
y'all, that everything y'all just said was about being free.
Yes.
That was freedom.
Yeah.
That's both of what you all. So yeah, I love it. I love it. Well, I hope that anyone that is listening to this considers what brings them joy and considers what gives them freedom.
Yes.
Because it is the pursuit of that I believe is a part of our own liberation, right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that.
That's a great way to end it, Kevin.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, this is it. Another episode of the Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators. We'll see you on the next episode. Peace. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the Exit Interview, a podcast for Black educators, please help support the podcast by sharing it with others, posting on social media, and leaving a rating and review. And as always, we're looking for former Black educators to interview. If that's you, send us a message on our website, exitinterviewpodcast.com.